right, thanks, Mark, for the overview on city forest credits. I'm really excited to be here to give a case study of a project that we've led here in the Seattle area over the past few years. So I'll give a little bit more information on how that project team came together, timeline, some of the other project goals, and the process of going through the registry with city forest credits. So just introduce myself again really quickly. My name is Dan Hintz. I'm the Restoration Projects Manager with the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust. For folks, I'm guessing a fair amount of people on the call that aren't familiar with the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, or maybe with kind of the landscape here in Western Washington in general. But we are a nonprofit organization focusing on conservation across the what we call Mountains to Sound Greenway National Heritage Area. The National Heritage Area was actually a designation from Congress in 2020, recognizing the cultural, historical, environmental aspects of this landscape. So stretching from Seattle across the Cascade Mountains into central Washington, as Annie provided in the intro, it's a 1.5 million acre landscape, and really trying to find that balance of, people and nature. And with that strong belief, as individuals, communities, we're all much stronger and healthier having those connections to nature. So the organization really started with a focus on land conservation, really trying to get land into public ownership and fill in some of the checkerboard pattern that was left from the railroad days out here. But now we're really focused on land stewardship. So I manage our ecological restoration program. We also do a lot of trail recreation work and have a robust education and volunteer programs as well. So specifically, I'm here to talk about a project that we call Ballinger Open Space, kind of referred to it as backyard restoration. There's probably about 100 people that back up to this 3-acre open space in Shoreline, Washington. Probably, was never developed. There's a creek that runs through it. There's wetlands. So unfortunately, it was fairly neglected for a long time, overrun with invasive species, kind of a failing canopy of mostly red alder. So it's a really neat opportunity to do this restoration and look at the development of carbon credits. So there's our restoration crew planting part of the open space in 2020. So you can see timestamp there with masks on while working outside. You can guess what year that is. So just quickly to get people's bearings, Shoreline, Washington is in the very northwest corner of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. It is the first suburb north of Seattle. Ballinger Open Space is located in Shoreline. Zooming in a little bit to the project setting, Ballinger Open Space, you can hopefully see the little red star on the map there, is located in the northeast corner of Shoreline. And for folks that aren't familiar, a lot of Shoreline's parks, open spaces are near Puget Sound, which is on the west end of Shoreline there. So when this project kind of started coming together, the city of Shoreline was really interested in working in areas where maybe there's a little less access, or at least access to, healthier open spaces. So it was really kind of interesting how this project came together. Just a small 3-acre site, and some of the, things that really looked at it from kind of a environmental equity standpoint is, some of the air quality issues, as Mark kind of talked about, some of the quantification for more than just the carbon sequestration, which I'll get into a little bit as well. And also some flooding and just kind of water quality issues with the creek that passes through the open space. So people can see this gray line that kind of runs north to south. That is Interstate 5, and the open space is in a low valley just near Interstate 5. So that is likely the result of a lot of the kind of poor air quality metrics that are, unfortunately associated with a lot of respiratory illnesses and diseases. So those are some of the factors we were looking at when this project came together. And to kind of recap the timeline for, both the habitat restoration work and going through the city forest credit registry. This really started as an idea and maybe even 2016, but really started moving in 2017 when we got connected with city forest credits. As Mark kind of mentioned, they were really working on their protocols and looking for interested partners to pilot, for our case, a tree planting carbon project. So, kind of funny enough, it was with a partnership we have with a local car dealership, Carter Subaru in the Shoreline area, that I believe we got connected with Mark early on, and they've supported some of our tree planting work for a good amount of time. And that was kind of the first connection. And it was really trying to find the right site. We have trust in our name, which is a little bit misleading because we do not directly manage at the city, county, state, and obviously the Forest Service level too. So it was kind of interesting because some of the cities we've worked with for a long time had some reservations based on the time commitment, the risk, and also City Forest Credits being a new organization that was just kind of getting this program started. So City of Shoreline was really interested in us taking on this location here. And we applied to the registry in 2018. We got some funding to start the project from American Forest that was funded through Bank of America. Later, some funding from the Nature Conservancy and locally the King County Flood Control District as well. But that was part of the process, so we essentially developed the project, got the funding, and led the implementation. Kind of with that, then the City of Shoreline agreed to transfer the right to receive credits. So that occurred in 2019, along with the project being approved by City Forest Credits. I'll have a couple pictures of the site just to get a little bit better feel of that process. But this was a long project for us, 2 to 3 years of implementation, partly because of the invasive species removal work that was required. A lot of sites that you might be able to go put trees in right away. This was not one of them. So that definitely took some kind of lead and prep time as well. So and then Mark kind of highlighted this in his slides too, but we were bundled in as part of that City Forest Credit national sale in 2021. So our credits were validated and verified in the second half of 2021. So just a couple quick slides. This is the southwest corner of the open space. And for folks that aren't familiar, this is our Himalayan blackberry that really dominates the understory. English ivy kind of growing up, toppling a lot of those alder trees, other invasive trees like holly, laurel on site. Unfortunately, since it was really inaccessible, I think most people know blackberries in the rose family. It's really thorny. It's not a plant that you want to just willingly go walk through. So unfortunately, a lot of it was just neglected. It was used kind of for dumping. This is kind of remnants of a lot of the trash we found after some of the initial mowing of blackberry on site in 2018. Found a lot of soccer balls, basketball, stuff like that neighbors were actually happy to reclaim, but a lot of other debris in there as well that the city helped us haul out. So that arrow pointing at an alder tree that's kind of angled there, just kind of looking at that 2 years later. This is my colleague Katie and I out there in the winter of 2020 with a couple Western red cedars that are really taking off. And then a year later, this is actually in spring of 2021, not the exact location, but one of our sampling spots here that you can see marked with this T-bar transect point. We really focused a lot of conifers, bigger growing, long living coniferous trees in the edge of the sites that were a little drier. We planted a lot of kind of more densely clustered willows and some cottonwoods in the middle with live stakes, especially to try to get some shade and canopy established quickly to deal with some of the more sun-loving weeds like blackberry and reed canary grass on site. So Mark covered a lot of this, so I can kind of go over this quickly, but obviously we're talking a lot about the development of carbon credits and carbon sequestration as goals, but I think really highlighting, there's so many mutual benefits of this work, and the City Forest Credits quantification tool really helps you actually identify, whether those are the metrics or some of the potential associated dollar values of those benefits. So I mentioned this site had a lot of flooding and wetland issues, so really looking at the water quality and flood reduction through, rain interception and, more trees kind of soaking up and slowing down water moving through the open space. Talked about air quality briefly. Backyard bird habitat, we're focusing on the trees for the credits, but we planted a lot of shrubs that attract pollinators or have kind of more flowering times in their life cycle for neighbors, kind of for the aesthetic and for the pollinator habitat. But the last two, the local community building and the improved site access. I guess 2 quick anecdotes I'd like to share. We were able to lead a handful of volunteer events, but unfortunately had to put a pause on that with the pandemic. But just seeing neighbors come by, I had a dad come by and tell me once that he's just so excited that he can bring his young daughter down to touch and interact with the stream, and actually have that in their neighborhood. The mom and her son, they actually have pet ducks that they'll come out and help dig out blackberry with us while their ducks feed on worms in the soil. So just really awesome little neighbor stories and kind of appreciations of the work going on. And you can see people that are starting to kind of explore and interact with this open space. And by no means am I saying this is a place you would drive to or go out of your way to visit, but for the people that live right there, I think it's still a really amazing resource. So quickly, for people that are interested in the species, I kind of touched on this already. We really focused on conifers like Sitka spruce, western red cedar, Douglas fir, grand fir on kind of a little bit drier, higher perimeters of the site, and a lot of cottonwood, willows, poplar type trees in the interior of the site. I believe someone had a question in the chat about how you're actually quantifying these, and I will let Mark get into a little bit more specific details if people would like that once we get to the chat section. But as Mark mentioned, Greg McPherson provided a lot of the information that developed City Forest Credit's planting quantification tool. So this is just one screenshot from the actual planting list page, and you can see there's a really long, extensive list of different types of species that are essentially categorized into small, medium, large, broadleaf, deciduous, broadleaf evergreen, and conifer species. So you can only see a few of ours that made it on the top of this list: grand fir, fine maple, big leaf maple, but that all gets summarized in that table and put into table 2, grouped by the different size and types of trees, which helps inform the amount of carbon stored over that 25-year period. So you can see we had just under 2,000 trees for our site, and Mark kind of touched on some of that process with submitting the documentation and the validation process with City Forest Credit. So can touch on that briefly. One of the main documents that the Mountain Sound Greenway, as the project operator, had to put together is a project design document, which includes planting plans for monitoring, that right to transfer credits from the city of Shoreline, a bunch of stuff that goes in there, but there's really nice templates that are provided by City Forest Credits. I guess if I can say anything, I feel like it's a really good balance of having really well-detailed protocols, but also not so cumbersome where you would look at it and be like, oh, I don't want to take on this project because of the amount of paperwork or the amount of time that goes into some of the documentation. So I do really feel, at least from our experience, that it strikes a really good balance between having really good data and documentation, but not making it such a burden where it all of a sudden becomes maybe not worth it to try to generate the carbon credits. One thing that I would call out is a little bit of a lesson learned for us is the attestations of tree planting. So essentially, it's how you're documenting that the trees went into the ground. So I would encourage a lot of redundancy there, whether that's photos, whether those are kind of sketches of sample plots like I have here on the right. Invoices from nurseries where you've planted trees, spreadsheets, any other tracking methods you have, that's a big important part to get the credits verified and through the validation process. So, and then there's some other forms that are a little bit more straightforward, making sure you're not double counting, making sure there's no net harm, you're not displacing any sort of other valuable habitat or land use. So those are kind of the series of the documents that go into the validation with the registry. Mark already touched on this, some sampling in years 4, 6, and I believe 14. I might have missed that one, Mark. And our kind of methods, we kind of established these up front for having that baseline data was 4 tenth of an acre plots, so roughly 15% sample of the 3-acre open space, and you can see what one of those plots looks like and the associated species that we have planted. So this is one of the more center spots, so it's a lot of densely planted, cottonwood, willows, dogwood. So we definitely kind of fell under the cluster planting design and not the single planting design, since this is a restoration planting where we're really trying to develop canopy, especially to compete with some of the invasive plants on site. And then, lastly, the data documents, get validated through City Forest Credits. They go to a third-party verifier, and then the credits are issued at that point once everything looks good. So kind of summarizing, you saw a table like this for Mark. I believe it was the Chicago project. Sorry if I'm forgetting that, but kind of, looking at the amount of credits that are projected to be generated over that 25-year period. And for our 1,945 trees, it's about 2,200 credits. As Mark mentioned, it's 1 credit, is a metric ton of CO2. The time frame that these credits are received. So we actually received about 220 credits, or about 10% of that total projection this past year. And for us at $34, that was about $7,000 or $8,000. But then there's those projections down the line of when you'll receive those additional credits as well. I believe there's also a question in the chat around mortality. There is a 20% mortality put in for those year 1 credits. So I couldn't tell you the math exactly, but whatever 20% less of that 1,945 trees is what actually was credited. So that might shift, your mortality might show to be higher or lower in those subsequent sampling years and will be kind of adjusted accordingly. But, I think the goal is obviously not wanting to fool ourselves that, trees, especially in these urban environments, definitely do see some decent mortality, especially in those first, 5-10 years. And then some of the other co-benefits that are so great that we can report out to funders or, partners on this project around rainfall interception, energy reduction, and, some of those air quality improvements. I like this as just a quick kind of messaging slide. When I started this, most of my background's in botany, ecology. I don't have a ton of experience, even though it's growing in terms of the carbon market. But just kind of curious what 2,200 tons of carbon is, over that 25-year period, and it's not insignificant even for a small 3-acre open space. It's about equal to taking 475 cars in the U.S. off the road for a full year. And there's a EPA reference, kind of stating about 4.6 metric tons, per American driver for a full year. So just ways that you can kind of think about this, since a metric ton of carbon, something you don't actually see or can touch, is a little bit abstract, for most people. And then lastly, just kind of circling back on this long-term commitment. I think Mark nailed it and exactly how we feel. I mean, to certain folks, it's a bit of a challenge, and it's also a really amazing opportunity. We are a very place-based, land-based organization, and there's sites that we've been working for 20 plus years already. So to have that long-term commitment, obviously that huge benefit of having maintenance dollars come in over the course of that 25 years was a big part of the reason we wanted to jump into this, and we'll look at developing future projects as well. So I think a lot of you obviously know, but it's a little easier to get funding for new projects that first 3, maybe 4 or 5 years, and then it's a lot harder to find consistent funding, especially as a nonprofit, over longer periods. So this being a really, really great source to generate that revenue and look at the true benefits of the tree planting working we're doing as it relates to carbon sequestration. So really neat to see us, investing in that long-term health, and community engagement at Ballinger Open Space, whether that be, the weeding, the mulching, the watering, and you can see a volunteer event there early on as we were just first planting the site in 2019. So quickly, we had a lot of great partners and funders on this project. I mentioned American Forest, King County Flood Control District, Bank of America, the Nature Conservancy. City of Shoreline has been hugely supportive and has provided a lot of match with their staff. And then, working with, obviously, closely with City Forest Credits as well through the whole process, and really, really good relationship there with their staff. Lastly, my contact info is here, and I think you can follow up. There'll be some stuff sent out by Annie and the team here. So please don't hesitate if you have questions, a little bit more on our experience with the registry, or even more broadly, the restoration work we're doing here out in Washington. Please don't hesitate to follow up, and I'd love to chat. I'm excited to hear some questions here.